Have you ever walked away from a conversation replaying someone's harsh words in your head, feeling that familiar sting of criticism sinking deep? Maybe it was a casual remark from a coworker that stuck with you all day, or a family member's offhand comment that left you questioning yourself. We've all been there, that moment when external opinions feel like they're shaping our worth. But what if I told you there's an ancient philosophy, tested by time and hardship, that can teach you not just to handle criticism, but to transform it into fuel for unshakable self-respect? Stoicism, practiced by emperors and thinkers like Marcus Aurelius, offers more than just grit. It gives us a roadmap to reclaim our inner power. As Aurelius once wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." That's the paradox we're tackling today. Why do we let outside voices drown out our own? And how can we rewrite that script? This isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending criticism doesn't hurt. Stoicism isn't a callous philosophy, it's a practical one. It recognizes the pain but hands you the tools to alchemize it. Imagine waking up tomorrow with a newfound ability to hear harsh feedback without flinching, to process judgment without self-doubt creeping in, and to walk through the world with a quiet confidence that no opinion can shake. That's what we're building together. In this video, we'll explore 26 strategic Stoic tips, each rooted in the wisdom of philosophers who faced far greater adversities than office gossip or social media trolls. These aren't vague platitudes, they're battle-tested techniques divided into 3 key themes: mastering perception, how you interpret criticism; refining response, how you engage with it; and fortifying self-worth, how you protect your core identity. Think of this as your mental armor workshop. By the end, you'll have a personalized toolkit to disarm criticism before it destabilizes you, turning what once felt like attacks into opportunities for growth. Whether it's a passive-aggressive comment, outright hostility, or even your own inner critic, these principles will help you stay grounded in your values. Because here's the truth, criticism only stings when we give it permission to. Stoicism teaches us how to revoke that permission, not through arrogance, but through the quiet dignity of self-mastery. So if you're ready to stop outsourcing your self-worth and start building resilience from the inside out, let's begin this journey together. The first step: understanding why criticism hits us so hard in the first place and how Stoics reframe it as a gift. Imagine holding a fragile clay jar in your hands. One careless move and it shatters. Now picture handing that jar to someone else. The moment it leaves your grip, whether it stays intact or breaks, is entirely out of your control. This is the powerful metaphor Epictetus used to explain the Stoic distinction between what belongs to us and what doesn't. The jar represents other people's words, their criticism, their opinions, even their praise. No matter how tightly we clutch it, we can't control whether they choose to throw it or cradle it. But here's what we do control: our own reasoning, the sturdy table where that jar sits in our mind. When criticism comes your way, the first Stoic move is to pause and ask, what part of this is fact and what part is someone else's interpretation? Take a blunt comment like, "Your presentation was disorganized." The fact might be that you skipped a slide transition or missed a time marker. The opinion is the label, disorganized, and that's the critic's judgment, not objective reality. Epictetus put it perfectly: what upsets people is not events, but their judgments about events. Think of 2 co-workers receiving the same feedback. One spirals, internalizing it as proof they're incompetent. The other dissects it calmly, asking, is their data here to improve, or is this just one person's perspective? This separation is liberation. By mentally tagging criticism as an external opinion, not a truth cemented to your worth, you drain its emotional charge. Picture criticism like rain. You can't stop the downpour, but you can choose whether to stand there soaked or put up an umbrella. The next time someone's words sting, try this exercise. Grab a pen and divide a page into 2 columns. On the left, list the concrete facts of what was said or done. On the right, write the judgments or emotions attached. You'll often find the real weight comes from the right column, the part you never needed to carry in the first place. This isn't about dismissing feedback. It's about filtering it through reason, not emotion. Even harsh criticism might hold a useful nugget, but you'll only spot it if you're not drowning in defensiveness. The Stoics weren't suggesting we become emotionless robots. They were teaching us to create space between stimulus and response, where our power truly lies. So the next time criticism lands, remember the jar. You didn't break it. Your hands are free, ready to build instead. Imagine seeing Earth from space, how small our conflicts seem from that distance. The bustling cities, the heated arguments, the sting of criticism, all reduced to silent specks against the vastness. This is the view from above, a mental exercise Marcus Aurelius used to dissolve pettiness and regain perspective. He wrote, "Think of the substance of the whole, what a drop of water is to the river, and what the river is to the sea." When criticism threatens to consume you, this cosmic zoom out reminds you, the words that feel earth-shattering today are barely ripples in the grand scheme. Take the story of Socrates, who faced relentless slander during his trial. His accusers called him a corrupter of youth, a blasphemer, yet he drank the hemlock unshaken, knowing his legacy would outlast their voices. He understood what Marcus later articulated. In the life of a man, his time is but a moment, his fame a breath. That insult from a colleague, that snide remark online, how much will it matter when you're reflecting on your life decades from now? This isn't about dismissing present emotions, but about anchoring them to something larger. Try this. Next time criticism lands, close your eyes and picture yourself 5 years in the future. You're looking back at this moment. Does that person's opinion still hold weight, or has it faded like graffiti washed away by rain? Historians note that even the most vicious critics of great artists, scientists, and leaders are footnotes at best, while their contributions endure. The Stoics weren't asking us to ignore pain, they were teaching us to contextualize it. Marcus kept a journal reminder: the universe is change, life is opinion. That cutting remark, it's already dissolving into the past. Your response, whether you grow from it or shrug it off, is what remains. So breathe deep and pull back the lens. From here, you'll see the criticism for what it is, a speck in your sky, not the sky itself. Picture a firefighter walking into a burning building, calm, methodical, completely prepared for the chaos ahead. They've trained for this moment, running countless drills so that when the heat comes, their actions are instinctive. This is the power of Premeditatio Malorum, the Stoic practice of premeditating adversity. Seneca called it rehearsing your fears in advance, and it's not about pessimism, it's about immunization. By mentally preparing for criticism before it strikes, you strip away its element of surprise, leaving you poised rather than rattled. Think of it like a chess grandmaster studying countless games. They don't just hope their opponent makes a move they know how to counter. They've already visualized every possible attack and planned their response. That's why Seneca warned, fortune falls heavily on those for whom she's unexpected. When you've already imagined the worst-case scenario, a harsh comment, a dismissive review, even public ridicule, you're not caught off guard. Your mind has already traced the emotional path, so when it happens, you're not reacting from panic but responding from principle. Take the example of a TED speaker who visualizes hecklers in the crowd before stepping on stage. They don't do this to psych themselves out, but to normalize the possibility. When a challenging question does come, they're not derailed, they're ready. This practice works just as powerfully in everyday life. Before sending a creative project to your team, pause and ask, what are 3 critiques someone might have? Maybe they'll call it too ambitious, too simplistic, or too unconventional. Now, script your calm, considered responses in advance. Yes, it's ambitious, here's why that's necessary. I kept it simple to highlight the core idea. Unconventional, that's precisely the point. This isn't about assuming the worst in people. It's about acknowledging that criticism is inevitable and choosing to meet it on your terms. The Stoics weren't suggesting we dwell on negativity. They were teaching us to disarm it. Like a vaccine introduces a weakened virus to build immunity, Premeditatio Malorum introduces controlled doses of adversity to strengthen resilience. When you've already walked through the scenario in your mind, the real thing feels like a rerun, not a shock. So try this tonight. Spend 5 minutes envisioning a situation where your work or choices might face scrutiny. Play out the dialogue not with defensiveness but with detached curiosity. How would your most grounded self reply? By the time criticism arrives, you'll have already weathered it in the safety of your mind. The sting neutralized, the lesson clear, and your self-respect unshaken. Epictetus once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so we can listen twice as much as we speak." That simple anatomical truth holds the key to one of the most powerful Stoic tools, the pause. Not just any pause, but that intentional space between criticism and reaction where wisdom grows. Imagine your mind as a calm lake. When someone throws a stone of harsh words, the ripples don't have to become waves. Marcus Aurelius described this perfectly. You don't have to be jerked around like a puppet by others' words. The difference between a knee-jerk reaction and a thoughtful response often comes down to those few seconds of stillness. Think of a skilled diplomat facing a heated accusation across the negotiation table. They don't fire back immediately, they breathe, let the words hang in the air, and respond with precision rather than emotion. That's the Stoic pause in action. It's not passive, it's strategic. When criticism hits, your first instinct might be to defend, explain, or counterattack. But what if instead you created space? Try this. The next time someone critiques you, silently count to 10 while breathing deeply. In that brief window, ask yourself 3 questions. Is this true? Is this useful? Does this person's opinion define me? This practice does something remarkable. It shifts criticism from something that happens to you to something you observe. Picture a tennis player waiting for a serve. They don't rush forward blindly. They watch the ball's trajectory, adjust their stance, then swing. The pause is where choice lives. Ancient Stoics called this prosouch, attention to the present moment before action. It's the antidote to those conversations we replay at 3 a.m., wishing we'd responded differently. You might wonder, won't pausing make me seem unsure or weak? Quite the opposite. There's quiet strength in measured responses. Consider how Abraham Lincoln handled venomous letters. He'd write furious replies, then place them in his desk drawer unsent. By morning, clarity replaced heat. That's the pause working its alchemy. Your critics don't control your reactions, you do. So train yourself like an athlete trains their muscles. Start small. When a coworker questions your idea, notice the urge to interrupt and instead let 2 full breaths pass before speaking. Marcus wrote, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." Those seconds of silence aren't empty. They're where you reclaim authorship of your story. Because here's the secret. Most criticism loses its power when it doesn't get an immediate rise out of you. Like a fire without oxygen, it flickers out. So breathe, count, and remember, you're not a puppet. You're the one holding the strings. Marcus Aurelius described the mind as an inner citadel, a fortress so well built that no external force could breach its walls without permission. Picture a medieval castle with towering stone walls, where inside, the ruler makes calm decisions regardless of the chaos outside. That's the Stoic ideal, a core self so grounded in clear values that criticism rolls off like rain against granite. But here's the crucial distinction: this isn't about building walls to keep the world out. It's about fortifying your center so you can engage with the world without being destabilized by it. How do you construct this citadel? Start with the bricks of self-awareness. Marcus wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Every judgment you internalize, every value you consciously choose, adds another layer to your inner stronghold. Take the example of a sculptor who carves breathtaking statues despite art critics calling her work unrefined or too radical. She doesn't ignore feedback, she simply weighs it against her own artistic North Star. When harsh reviews come, she asks, does this align with why I create? If not, it belongs outside the citadel gates. Journaling was the Stoics' blueprint for this construction. Each night they'd reflect, what principles guided me today? Where did I compromise? Imagine your mind as an architect drafting plans. Write down 3 non-negotiable values that define your work, relationships, or creativity. Maybe it's integrity, speaking truth even when inconvenient, or perseverance, continuing when others doubt. These become your citadel's foundation. When criticism arrives, you don't ask, do they approve? You ask, does this threaten what I've built within? Consider the composer who kept conducting symphonies after a newspaper declared his music a noise only cats could appreciate. He famously quipped, "Then I shall compose for cats." His citadel wasn't arrogance, it was clarity. He knew his purpose: to push boundaries, not please every ear. That's the power of the inner fortress. The world will always have opinions, but you choose which ones get past the drawbridge. So tonight, light a candle and grab your journal. Sketch your citadel's blueprint. What 3 principles are so essential to who you are that no criticism could shake them? Write them in ink. Tomorrow, when voices try to storm your gates, you'll stand firm. Not because you're rigid, but because you know exactly what you're protecting. Seneca wrote that gold is tested by fire, and genius is tested by adversity. But what if we stopped seeing criticism as something to endure and started treating it as fuel for refinement? The Stoics didn't just tolerate feedback, they mined it for wisdom, like alchemists turning base metals into gold. Picture an Olympic sprinter reviewing race footage frame by frame, not to punish themselves for missteps, but to pinpoint where a single stride adjustment could shave milliseconds off their time. That's the mindset shift. Criticism isn't a verdict on your worth, it's raw material for your evolution. Let's break down the alchemy. First, separate the flame from the forge. Malicious feedback comments designed to wound, not improve, is like a wildfire, destructive and best avoided. But constructive critique, even when poorly delivered, carries embers of truth. A chef doesn't discard a dish because one diner finds it too spicy. They ask, does this reveal a pattern? Have others hinted at this? Seneca observed, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Every piece of valid feedback is a free gym session for your character. Take the case of a novelist who received a scathing review calling her dialogue wooden. She could have dismissed it as envy, but instead she spent weeks studying play scripts, recording conversations in cafes, and emerged with prose that later won awards. That's the Stoic move. Extract the signal from the noise. Ask yourself, if I applied just 1% of this feedback, how might I grow? not all critiques deserve action, but all deserve consideration. Here's a practice to try tonight. Grab a notebook and write down 3 criticisms you've received, old or recent, next to each answer. Did this reveal a blind spot? Did it push me to improve? You'll likely find that the critiques you resisted hardest contained the most potent lessons. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the obstacle becomes the way. The comment that stings today could be the exact friction needed to polish your edges tomorrow. So the next time feedback lands, pause and ask the Stoics' question: is this the fire that destroys or the one that refines? Either way, you control the temperature. Imagine standing in an ancient Athenian marketplace, surrounded by hecklers hurling insults at your ideas. Now picture Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, calmly continuing his lecture as if the noise were mere background chatter. That's the essence of the sage's mirror technique, stepping outside yourself to ask, how would the wisest version of me handle this? Epictetus urged his students to set up a certain standard and pattern in their minds, not to mimic philosophers like puppets, but to embody their unshakable principles when criticism strikes. Think of a Supreme Court justice reading scathing editorials about their rulings. The public outcry might be deafening, but they don't bend to the mob's fervor. Instead, they weigh each word against constitutional principles, not popularity polls. That's the sage's mirror in action, a deliberate pause to consult an internal compass before reacting. When someone mocks your work or questions your choices, try this. Mentally project yourself into the shoes of Marcus Aurelius penning his meditations during military campaigns, or Seneca writing letters of wisdom while exiled on Corsica. Their circumstances were far harsher than modern criticism, yet their responses became timeless lessons in dignity. This isn't about pretending to be emotionless. It's about accessing the part of you that's already wiser than the provocation deserves. Picture a master chess player observing a beginner's reckless move. They might smile, but they won't abandon their strategy to prove a point. That's the posture you're cultivating, the ability to discern when a critique merits engagement and when it's merely noise. Here's how to practice it today. Before responding to criticism, literally visualize a mirror. In it, see your most grounded, principled self. What's their posture? Their tone? Maybe they nod thoughtfully before speaking, or perhaps they simply return to their work without dignifying pettiness. Epictetus said, "First tell yourself what kind of person you want to be, then do what you have to do." The mirror isn't there to judge you. It's there to remind you of the strength you already possess. Consider the scientist whose controversial theory was ridiculed by peers. Instead of lashing out, she refined her experiments, knowing truth isn't determined by consensus. Years later, her persistence redefined her field. That's the sage's mirror's power. It turns criticism into a litmus test for your convictions. So the next time words sting, don't ask, "How do I feel?" Ask, "How would the sage in me respond?" The answer might surprise you. Epictetus left us a simple yet revolutionary tool, the 3 columns exercise, to cut through the emotional fog of criticism. Picture a courtroom stenographer meticulously recording every word of a trial, but instead of testimony, you're documenting your reactions. Column 1, the bare facts of what happened. My manager said the report missed key data. Column 2, your immediate judgment. I'm terrible at details. They think I'm incompetent. Column 3, the Stoic gatekeeper. Is this within my control? The magic happens in the space between these columns, where you separate the event from the story you've wrapped around it. Take a CEO facing heated shareholder complaints. In column 1, she writes, 3 investors criticized our sustainability timeline. Column 2 reveals her inner narrative. They think I'm dragging my feet. I'll lose their trust. Then comes the pivot in column 3. Their opinions not mine to control, my response 100% mine. Suddenly, what felt like a crisis becomes a checklist. This practice doesn't dismiss emotions, it gives them a designated space so they don't hijack your reasoning. Epictetus advised, write down your impressions, describe the event to yourself without embroidery, because raw facts are lighter to carry than the weight of interpretations. Here's why this works neurologically. When you physically journal, you engage the prefrontal cortex, your brain's logical control center, which dampens the amygdala's emotional alarms. A tech founder used this method after investors called his prototype unmarketable. His column 2 screamed, "They don't believe in me," but column 3 clarified, "Their market predictions aren't my domain." Improving the demo is, 6 months later, that refined prototype secured funding. The 3 columns don't just organize thoughts, they reveal hidden assumptions. That harsh feedback might actually be 5% about your work and 95% about your fear of inadequacy. Tonight, try this. Open a notebook to a blank page. Draw 2 vertical lines creating 3 equal columns. In the first, describe a recent criticism with the neutrality of a security camera recording, just facts. In the second, vent every emotional interpretation. Then, in the third, channel Epictetus. Circle every item that's truly within your sway. You'll likely find most of your distress lives in column 2, the stories you've authored, not the events themselves. As your pen moves across the page, watch how the weight shifts. What once felt like an indictment becomes just words on paper, some useful, some irrelevant, none definitive. That's the Stoic superpower, turning criticism from a tsunami into waves you can navigate. What if the sharpest criticism you've ever received was secretly a gift in disguise? That's the radical lens of Amor Fati, a Stoic practice Nietzsche later called love of fate. It's not about enjoying pain, but recognizing that every critique, even the brutal ones, carves grooves in your character you couldn't have shaped alone. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Picture a blacksmith's forge. The hammer's blows aren't destroying the blade, they're tempering it. Harsh feedback works the same way. Consider Charles Darwin, whose early manuscripts were torn apart by fellow scientists. One critic called his evolution draft a pile of speculation stacked on shaky assumptions. Instead of shelving his work, Darwin spent 8 more years methodically addressing every objection, emerging with On the Origin of Species, a book that redefined biology. Later, he admitted those ruthless critiques forced him to build ironclad evidence. That's Amor Fati in action, embracing criticism as the whetstone for your intellect. Here's how to apply this today. When feedback stings, pause and ask, if I chose this critique to appear in my life, what might it be teaching me? Maybe that passive-aggressive email from a colleague highlights a communication blind spot. Perhaps the client's rejection reveals an untapped market need. Nietzsche wrote, "My formula for greatness is Amor Fati, not wanting anything to be different." That doesn't mean resigning yourself to unfair treatment. It means mining every experience for its growth potential. Try this reframe. Criticism is like a GPS recalibrating your route. When it says recalculating, it's not insulting your driving. It's ensuring you reach the destination faster. The next time someone's words feel like roadblocks, hear them as redirects. Marcus Aurelius kept a journal reminder. The cucumber is bitter, throw it away. There are brambles in the path, go around. You don't need to demand, why do these things exist? The Stoic doesn't waste energy raging at the obstacle. They use it to forge a new path. So tonight, pull out one critique you've resisted. Write it down, then finish this sentence. This feedback could serve me by. Maybe it's revealing a skill to hone, a boundary to set, or simply thicker skin to grow. That's the alchemy of Amor Fati, transforming leaden criticism into golden self-mastery, one intentional embrace at a time. Ever catch yourself offering a friend gentle encouragement after a setback, then turning around to berate yourself mercilessly for the same mistake? That's the double standard trap, and it's one of the quietest thieves of self-respect. Seneca saw this clearly when he wrote, "We are our own worst critics, yet we'd never tolerate such cruelty from others." The Stoics called this equanimitas, equal-mindedness, the practice of holding yourself to the same compassionate standards you'd extend to anyone else. Picture a judge who sentences others to community service but imposes life sentences on themselves for similar offenses. That's what happens when we weaponize criticism against ourselves while disarming it for others. Take the case of a novelist who spends hours polishing a colleague's manuscript, highlighting strengths and suggesting tweaks with care. Later, when reviewing her own work, she scribbles clumsy and unoriginal in the margins before tossing the pages aside. The cognitive dissonance is staggering, yet we all do versions of this daily. The fix, a simple but profound mental flip. Imagine your inner critic's words being spoken aloud to someone you love. Would you let a friend's child hear, "You'll never be good enough," or "That attempt was pathetic"? If not, why license that voice in your own mind? Here's how to run the double standard check. First, catch the harsh self-talk in action. Maybe it's, "I bombed that meeting," or "My work isn't as sharp as theirs." Now, mentally transplant those words onto a colleague or friend. Feel how they land differently. That discomfort is your compass. The Stoics weren't advocating self-indulgence. They were insisting on fairness. As Seneca reminded Lucilius, no one is a worse slave than he who torments himself. Try this tonight. Keep a self-talk ledger. On one side, jot down criticisms you've leveled at yourself this week. On the other, write how you'd rephrase those comments for a friend. You'll likely find your own column reads like a courtroom prosecution, while the other resembles a supportive coach's notes. The goal isn't to eliminate self-improvement, it's to align it with the dignity you'd afford any human being. Consider the Olympic athlete who told reporters, "I'd never let a teammate dwell on a loss the way I do." Her breakthrough came when she started treating her post-race analysis like a teammate's debrief, fact-based, forward-looking, free from character assaults. That's Stoic equality in motion. Your inner dialogue should sound less like a hostile cross-examination and more like the conversation you'd have with someone you're sworn to protect. Because you are. There's a reason Cotto the Younger became legendary for his silence. When political rivals mocked him in Rome's Senate, he didn't rise to deliver fiery rebuttals. He simply continued his work, letting his integrity speak louder than their taunts. This wasn't passivity, it was strategic restraint. The Stoics understood something modern psychology confirms. When we rush to defend ourselves against every criticism, we validate the critic's power over us. Musonius Rufus put it plainly, "Virtue isn't proclaimed, it shines through conduct." Imagine two painters standing before their canvases. One stops to argue with every passerby who critiques their brushstrokes. The other keeps painting layer by layer until the work's brilliance silences doubters. Which one commands respect? Consider the scientist whose controversial climate research was dismissed as alarmist by industry-funded critics. She could have spent years debating in editorial pages, but instead, she doubled down on data collection. 5 years later, her team's exhaustive ice core samples became undeniable evidence, shifting global policy. That's the Stoic approach, letting action absorb the noise. When you're tempted to defend your choices, ask yourself, would my energy be better spent improving what I'm defending? Every minute spent justifying your path is a minute not spent walking it. This doesn't mean never engaging. It means choosing battles where words truly matter. Think of a lighthouse keeper ignoring seagull squawks to keep the beacon steady. The ships needing guidance don't care about the birds, they need the light. Your critics are often like those seagulls, loud, temporary, and ultimately irrelevant to those who benefit from your work. Marcus Aurelius modeled this in his reign, writing, "The best revenge is to be unlike your enemy." When petty insults flew, he focused on governance reforms that outlasted the gossip. Here's a challenge. Pick one project you've delayed because you're waiting for universal approval. Now map out the next 3 concrete steps you'll take, not to prove naysayers wrong, but to honor your own standards. Like Cotto, you might find that the quiet confidence of progress drowns out the noise far more effectively than any rebuttal. After all, the echo of a shouted argument fades quickly, but the impact of meaningful work reverberates long after the critics have moved on. Imagine watching a heated argument from a balcony above, seeing the gestures, hearing the voices, but detached from the emotional current. That's the power of the third story perspective, a technique mediators use to dissolve conflicts by stepping outside both sides' narratives. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, reminding himself to strip away the legend that encrusts things and see events as a neutral historian might. When criticism feels personal, this mental shift lets you examine it like an archaeologist dusting off artifacts, not as wounds to nurse, but as data to interpret. Take 2 co-workers clashing over a failed project. One insists, "You didn't communicate deadlines clearly." The other fires back, "You ignored my reminders." Both are trapped in their first stories. Now picture a documentary narrator describing the same event. Team members operated on conflicting assumptions about urgency, with neither fully recognizing the other's constraints. Suddenly, it's not about blame, it's about systemic breakdowns. That's the third story at work. Ancient Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but clear-eyed objectivity. By removing the I from the equation, you spot patterns invisible when you're drowning in defensiveness. Try this exercise next time criticism stings. Pull out your phone's voice recorder and describe the conflict as if you're a journalist filing a neutral report. "No," he said / she said, "just observable facts. At 10 a.m., X stated the design lacked branding consistency. Y cited time constraints as the reason for simplified visuals." Hearing it played back often reveals how much of the heat came from your own interpretations, not the actual words spoken. Marcus wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact." Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. The third story isn't about dismissing emotions, it's about separating the raw event from the screenplay you've layered over it. Consider how therapists help couples reframe arguments. "So what I'm hearing is, you both value punctuality, but define on time differently." That slight pivot from adversary to interpreter can turn a shouting match into a problem-solving session. Your critics aren't always wrong, they're just speaking from a different script. The Stoic move: become the playwright who understands every character's motivation, not just your own role. So tonight, revisit a recent critique through this lens. How would a biographer writing your life story summarize this moment? Would they cast you as a victim, a villain, or something more nuanced? Truth often lives in the spaces between our reactions, and when you learn to dwell there, even the sharpest criticism becomes just another scene in your epic, not the entire plot. Seneca once wrote to his friend Lucilius about a peculiar torture we inflict on ourselves, the phantom audience he called the invisible jury. Picture this: you're walking into a room, convinced everyone notices your nervous gait, the coffee stain on your shirt, the way your voice shakes when you speak. Here's the truth that set Seneca free. Most of those imagined critics are too preoccupied with their own invisible juries to hold court over yours. Epictetus drilled this home with his razor-sharp observation. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, fearing rebukes that never come, anticipating judgments no one actually delivers. Take the violinist who nearly quit performing because she was certain audiences could detect her trembling hands until a mentor blindfolded her during practice and asked, "Can you hear the shake?" The answer was no. The imperfections she magnified were imperceptible to anyone beyond her own skin. This is the great irony of social anxiety. We become both the accused and the prosecutor in trials that exist only in our mind. Modern psychologists call this the spotlight effect, our tendency to overestimate how much others notice our flaws. The Stoics recognized it 2,000 years earlier as a failure of perspective. Consider how often you've rehearsed conversations that never happened, braced for criticism that never came, or avoided opportunities fearing some nebulous they might disapprove. That invisible jury isn't judging you, it's a projection of your own self-doubt wearing disguises. Marcus Aurelius confronted this by writing, "It's ridiculous you dread not what others think, but your own conjectures about what they think." The solution isn't to stop caring entirely, but to distinguish real feedback from mental fan fiction. Try this experiment for one day. Tally every instance you assume someone's negative judgment. The barrister who you think rolled their eyes at your order. The coworker whose quiet pause you interpret as disapproval. Then note how many of those judgments were ever voiced. You'll likely find what researchers confirm. Over 80% of anticipated criticism never materializes. The rest often far milder than imagined. Here's the Stoic reframe: treat unspoken criticism like a silent movie. Without the soundtrack of your anxious narration, the scenes lose their drama. That colleague who seemed dismissive might have been distracted by a sick child at home. The stranger who didn't smile back could be grieving. When we discard the invisible jury, we stop sentencing ourselves to punishments no one actually ordered. As Seneca concluded, we are chained to our own imaginations, and the key hangs within reach. Ancient scribes wrote on wax tablets precisely because the surface allowed them to revise, scraping away yesterday's notes to make room for today's wisdom. Marcus Aurelius described the ideal mind as functioning the same way. Imagine every perception, every thought as if it were etched in wax. The writing remains only as long as you choose to preserve it. This is the wax tablet mindset, a practice of letting critiques land without allowing them to permanently scar your psyche. Picture a politician waking up to vicious tabloid headlines, then stepping onto the podium hours later unshaken. The insults didn't vanish, they simply didn't adhere. There's a profound parallel here to Buddhist teachings on non-attachment. Not indifference, but the skillful art of experiencing thoughts and judgments without clutching them. The Stoic version isn't about becoming impermeable like stone, which eventually cracks under pressure, but permeable like wax. Impressions come and go without leaving permanent grooves. Modern neuroscience confirms this approach. Studies show that when we mentally label negative feedback as passing data, rather than personal truth, our amygdala's distress signals diminish. The critique doesn't disappear, it just loses its Velcro grip on your identity. Consider how a seasoned chef handles a food critic's harsh review. She might read it once, extract any useful notes about seasoning balance, then mentally melt the rest. The personal jabs about her culinary style dissolve like butter in a hot pan. Contrast this with a junior cook who pins the scathing review above his workstation, rereading it daily until he questions his career choice. Both received the same words, the difference lies in what they allowed to stick. Here's how to practice this tonight. Before bed, visualize any hurtful comments from the day written in smoke on a frosted window. Watch as each word evaporates by morning. Marcus advised, "Let the part of you that observes also be the part that decides what deserves to remain." This isn't repression, it's curation. You're not denying the criticism existed. You're refusing to archive it indefinitely in your mental library. The wax tablet mindset shines brightest under fire. When a journalist asked Eleanor Roosevelt how she endured relentless public scrutiny, she replied, "I used to care deeply what people thought until I realized how seldom they did." That's the ultimate liberation, recognizing most criticism has the lifespan of a mayfly. Your mind isn't a stone monument to be defaced, it's a dynamic surface, smooth and ready for the next meaningful inscription you choose to keep. Seneca once observed that even our sharpest critics can become unexpected allies in our growth, if we have the courage to sift through their words like prospectors panning for gold. He wrote, "No enemy can match a friend's candor," reminding us that truth often arrives in rough packaging. Picture a diamond buried in mud. It doesn't cease to be valuable because of its gritty surroundings. This is the 1% truth principle. In even the most unfair criticism, there's often a microscopic grain of insight waiting to be excavated. The Stoic skill lies in separating that speck of gold from the sediment of someone's tone, timing, or temperament. Take the world-renowned chef who received a scathing Yelp review calling his signature dish overpriced hospital food. The comment reeked of malice, but buried in that hyperbolic insult was a tiny signal. Some diners found the plating underwhelming for the price point. Instead of dismissing the entire critique, he refined the presentation, adding edible flowers that transformed the visual experience. The dish's essence remained, but that 1% adjustment elevated it to Michelin star status. As Musonius Rufus taught, we must listen to all but only follow the wise. The wisdom wasn't in the reviewer's hostility, it was in the chef's ability to distill a drop of truth from the poison. Here's how to practice this when faced with harsh feedback. Imagine holding a sieve, pour the criticism through it, let the emotional sludge drain away, and examine what remains. A client snaps, "This proposal is amateur hour." The 99% is their frustration, but the 1%, maybe your formatting lacked polish. A relative quips, "You'll never stick with that fitness routine." Their doubt is noise, but the signal might reveal you've historically abandoned goals when they become inconvenient. The Stoics called this Ekrine, the art of discerning what deserves your attention. Consider how sculptors approach marble. They don't discard the entire block because of surface flaws. They study the grain, working around imperfections to reveal the masterpiece within. Your critics, however unskilled their delivery, often point to the rough edges you've overlooked. Marcus Aurelius modeled this when he wrote, "I search myself for what's true, even if the speaker meant to wound me. So tonight, pull up that email, that comment, that offhand remark that's been nagging at you." Ask yourself, if I stripped away the tone, the timing, the person's biases, is there one actionable thread here? Sometimes the feedback we resist most contains the exact nudge we needed. As Seneca knew well, even a foe's arrow can point the way forward, if we're brave enough to trace its trajectory. Epictetus taught that between every external event and our reaction lies a critical pause, a moment where we choose whether to grant an impression the power to disturb us. He called this the discipline of assent, comparing the mind to a gatekeeper who decides which thoughts get welcomed into the citadel of our psyche. Picture a courtroom where every criticism, every harsh word, stands trial before your reason. You're not the defendant, you're the judge. This isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about recognizing that initial jolt of hurt as merely a first draft, not the final ruling on your worth. Take the example of a seasoned defense attorney during cross-examination. When opposing counsel snarls, "Your argument is full of holes," she doesn't flinch or fire back. Why? Because she's trained to hear the words without immediately accepting them as truth. Epictetus would say she's mastered the art of withholding assent, letting the barb dangle in the air long enough to ask, is this accurate? Is this useful? Before allowing it to influence her state of mind. That pause is where Stoic power lives. As Epictetus wrote, men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. The criticism itself is neutral until we stamp it with our endorsement. Here's how this works neurologically. When someone insults you, your amygdala lights up like a warning siren. That's the impression. But the prefrontal cortex, your brain's rational gatekeeper, can intervene with a simple question. Does this deserve my energy? That millisecond of deliberation is the discipline of assent in action. It's why two people can hear the same critique, say, your cooking is bland, and react entirely differently. One storms off, internalizing it as, I'm a terrible chef. The other considers, is this person's palate different? Did I undersalt the dish? The words were identical, the assent was not. Try this experiment tomorrow. Carry a small notebook and tally each time you instinctively agree with a negative impression. Your boss sighs during your presentation. You immediately think, I failed. A friend cancels plans, you assume, they're avoiding me. These are automatic assents, and they shape your emotional landscape more than you realize. The Stoic breakthrough comes when you start catching these moments like a referee spotting fouls. Hold on, that's just an impression. Do I have evidence this is true? Consider how elite athletes use this discipline. When a soccer player misses a penalty kick, the crowd roars with disappointment. The untrained mind might assent to, I've let everyone down, spiraling into shame. But the Stoic athlete treats that roar as mere sound waves, data to acknowledge, not a verdict to absorb. They've learned what Epictetus meant when he said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Your greatest weapon against criticism isn't armor. It's the quiet pause where you decide what gets through. So tonight, replay one criticism that recently stung. Now imagine it as a visitor knocking at your mental door. You're not obligated to invite it in for tea. You can nod politely from the threshold and say, I'll consider that, or even close the door entirely. That's the secret the Stoics guarded so fiercely. Your peace isn't determined by what's said to you, but by what you choose to endorse within yourself. The gatekeeper's keys are in your hands. Use them wisely. Seneca once compared handling criticism to an archer choosing targets. What good is hitting every random mark if none advance you toward your true goal? He called this Eustochia, the Stoic art of good aim. Picture an Olympic archer at dawn, ignoring the taunts of spectators and the rustling leaves, focusing only on the bullseye that matters. That's the mindset we cultivate when filtering feedback. Not every critique deserves your energy, only those aligned with your deepest intentions. As Seneca wrote to Lucilius, to chase every opinion is to scatter your arrows in the dark. You'll exhaust yourself hitting nothing of consequence. Consider a jazz pianist told her improvisations are too unconventional by classical purists. She could reshape her playing to please them, or she might ask, does their judgment even intersect with why I play? The purists crave precision. She seeks emotional truth. That's Eustochia in action, letting some criticisms whistle past like stray arrows while zeroing in on feedback that sharpens her unique voice. The Stoics weren't advocating stubbornness, they were teaching discernment. Marcus Aurelius modeled this when he wrote, it's possible to stand firm and yet not be chained to every passing opinion. Modern psychology echoes this ancient wisdom. Studies show that people who selectively engage with constructive feedback rather than reacting to every critique achieve mastery faster. A startup founder shared how early investors dismissed her app as too niche. Instead of pivoting wildly, she doubled down on serving that niche with precision. 5 years later, her company dominated a market others had overlooked. Like Seneca's archer, she knew which targets would prove her vision and which were just noise. Here's how to practice this today. Grab a notebook and draw 3 concentric circles. The innermost ring represents your core values, say, creativity or integrity. The middle holds skills you're actively honing, like public speaking. The outermost contains areas where others' opinions simply don't matter, maybe your hairstyle or casual hobbies. Next time criticism lands, map it to these rings. A comment about your rushed presentation, middle ring worth adjusting. A snide remark about your laugh. Outer ring, let it fly by, as Epictetus advised. If someone criticizes your walking, keep walking, just walk better. The magic of Eustochia lies in its liberation. You're not dismissing feedback, you're curating it. Imagine a gardener pruning a rose bush. She doesn't cut randomly, but strategically, removing only what stifles the bloom. Your growth deserves the same intentional care, so the next time opinions flood in, channel Seneca's archer. Knock only the arrows that help you hit your mark. The rest, let them fall harmlessly to the ground. Marcus Aurelius left us a simple but profound truth. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. This isn't poetic fluff, it's neurological fact. Every time you tell yourself, I'm terrible at this, or they think I'm a fraud, you're not just venting, you're staining your mental fabric with those very words. That's where the Stoic antidote technique comes in, a cognitive countermeasure as precise as an antibody neutralizing a toxin. Picture a doctor administering a vaccine before exposure to disease. This practice immunizes your mind against corrosive self-talk by preloading it with fortified truths. Take the college student facing his first philosophy exam. His inner critic whispers, "You'll embarrass yourself." But instead of letting that narrative metastasize, he reaches for his pre-written card, progress, not perfection. He doesn't argue with the fear, he overrides it with a phrase carrying centuries of Stoic weight. This is cognitive judo, using the momentum of negative thoughts to reinforce their opposites. Epictetus practiced this daily, reminding himself, I cannot control externals, but I can control my judgments about them. These weren't affirmations in the modern, fake it till you make it sense. They were recalibrations of perspective, aligning his inner dialogue with observable reality. Modern psychology confirms what the Stoics intuited. Our self-talk shapes our self-concept through a process called semantic priming. When you repeatedly call yourself clumsy, your brain starts filtering experiences to confirm that label. But the reverse is equally true. A surgeon preparing for a complex operation might combat nerves by silently repeating Galen's ancient maxim, "Skill thrives in stillness." The words don't magically erase anxiety, but they create neural pathways that make calm competence more accessible. Here's how to craft your personal Stoic antidote. First, identify your most frequent self-criticism. Maybe it's "I always procrastinate" or "people don't take me seriously." Now, distill its opposite into a concise, resonant phrase. Not fluffy positivity. Stoic antidotes are grounded in agency. For the procrastinator, action breeds clarity. For the overlooked professional, my worth isn't measured by their attention. Write it on your phone's lock screen, whisper it during your morning shave or makeup routine, stitch it into your gym bag's lining. Consider the playwright who battled imposter syndrome by tattooing Seneca's words on his wrist. Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for courage. When producers dismissed his scripts, he didn't need to reinvent his self-worth. He simply glanced at his wrist and remembered his lineage. That's the power of a well-chosen antidote. It outsources wisdom from your wisest self to your most vulnerable moments. Tonight, try this experiment. Place 2 sticky notes on your bathroom mirror. On one, write your most persistent self-doubt. On the other, pen its stoic counterweight. For the next week, whenever you catch yourself rehearsing the left note, consciously recite the right. You'll discover what Marcus knew: the mind, once dyed with purposeful thought, begins weaving its own resilience. Your antidote won't prevent storms, but it will remind you that you've weathered them before, armed with nothing but the right words and the will to mean them. Imagine 2 carpenters working side by side, one obsessively checking his neighbor's progress, trimming his boards to match, while the other keeps his eyes on his own blueprint, measuring each cut against his original vision. That's the stark difference between living by borrowed standards and what the Stoics called arid personal excellence, rooted in your deepest values, not the shifting sands of external validation. Epictetus warned about this with his typical bluntness. Don't let the thief of others' opinions steal your standards. He wasn't talking about literal theft. He meant the slow erosion that happens when we trade our inner compass for society's scorecards. Take the modern entrepreneur glued to vanity metrics, follower counts, competitor revenue, viral moments. These aren't inherently bad, but when they become the sole measure of worth, they're like trying to quench thirst with salt water. The more you consume, the emptier you feel. Contrast this with the founder who defines success as creating products that solve real problems or building a team that thrives. Their metrics might include customer gratitude notes or employee growth stories, data points invisible to outsiders but deeply aligned with their arid. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, it's ruinous for the soul to be a beggar for applause. This isn't about rejecting all external feedback. It's about filtering it through your own sieve of meaning. Consider how Olympic athletes train. A sprinter might study rivals' techniques, but her true benchmark is her personal best, that sacred number only she truly understands. The Stoics called this eudaimonia, flourishing by your own definition. When a journalist asked Frida Kahlo why her self-portraits didn't conform to traditional beauty standards, she replied, "I paint my own reality." That's arid in vivid color. Here's the challenge. Grab a notebook and draw 2 columns. Label 1, their yardsticks. List standards you've absorbed unconsciously, like must hit 6 figures by 30 or should have X followers. In the other column, my measures, write what truly resonates, perhaps honest craftsmanship or time for family dinners. The gap between these columns is where self-betrayal festers. Closing it doesn't require rebellion, just the quiet courage to measure what matters. Think of a school teacher judged by standardized test scores, while her true impact lies in students' newfound curiosity. Or the nurse evaluated by patient turnover, rates when her pride lies in holding a dying man's hand. Society's metrics will always clamor for attention, but the Stoics' power lies in choosing which scales to step onto. As Epictetus quipped, if you want to improve, be content to appear clueless in what others deem important. Your yardstick isn't found in their toolbox, it's been in your hands all along. Seneca once described adversity as the fire that tests gold. But what if criticism isn't just a test, but the very furnace that forges your rebirth? He wrote of the phoenix, that mythical bird that rises renewed from its own ashes, asking, "Why do you wonder that good men are shaken by adversity? They must be consumed to be reborn." This is the phoenix response, not merely surviving critique, but letting it incinerate what no longer serves you so something stronger can emerge. Think of a blacksmith's forge. The hammer doesn't destroy the blade, it reshapes it at white-hot temperatures. Criticism, when met with stoic resolve, works the same alchemy on character. Consider J.K. Rowling's early rejections. One publisher dismissed Harry Potter with "Children just aren't interested in wizard schools." That critique could have been the end, but Rowling treated it as kindling. She refined her pitch, deepened her world-building, and returned with a manuscript that became a cultural touchstone. The rejection didn't vanish, it became part of the story's legend. That's the Phoenix response in action, not denying the flames but using their heat to ascend. Seneca saw this as life's great paradox. No tree becomes rooted and sturdy unless tested by wind. What feels like destruction is often the prerequisite for growth. Here's how to practice this today. After receiving harsh feedback, grab a notebook and divide a page into 2 columns. Label the left "ashes" here, list what the critique burned away, maybe an outdated assumption, a lazy habit, or fragile pride. On the right, "new wings," jot how you might rebuild. A chef told his plating was cluttered, might simplify to showcase ingredients' purity. A manager criticized as micromanaging could institute weekly autonomy hours. The key isn't to adopt every suggestion blindly, but to ask, if I had to reinvent myself from scratch after this feedback, what would version 2.0 look like? History's most enduring creatives mastered this cycle. Beethoven's late compositions, those radical, boundary-shattering works, emerged after critics declared him washed up due to his deafness. Instead of replicating past successes, he reinvented musical language itself. Or take Maya Angelou, who transformed childhood trauma and racial prejudice into prose that redefined American literature. As she later reflected, "You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated." That's the Phoenix's secret. The flames don't mark the end, they're the necessary prelude to flight. Tonight, reflect on a recent critique that stung. Light a candle safely and watch the wax melt and reform. Ask yourself, what if this feedback isn't a verdict but a chrysalis? What might hatch if you stopped resisting the heat? Because here's the truth Seneca knew. Renewal isn't about avoiding the fire, it's about learning to breathe in the smoke until you spot the embers of your next beginning. There's a reason the ancient Cynic philosophers like Diogenes wandered Athens, deliberately provoking reactions, sleeping in barrels, eating raw onions in public, mocking social conventions. They weren't just eccentric performance artists, they were early practitioners of what Stoics later called voluntary discomfort, the intentional seeking of mild criticism to build immunity against life's inevitable harsher blows. Epictetus captured this perfectly. If you want to overcome stage fright, step on stage. If you fear poverty, practice living simply. And if you dread criticism, seek it out in measured doses. Picture it like a vaccine, a controlled exposure that strengthens your defenses without overwhelming your system. Take stand-up comedians testing new material in small, tough clubs before headlining big venues. Those early groans and heckles aren't failures, they're data points refining their craft. One famous comic described bombing on stage as emotional weightlifting, each awkward silence or critical heckle making his comedic muscles stronger. This isn't masochism, it's strategic resilience building. Modern psychology backs this approach. Exposure therapy works because it rewires our fear responses. When we voluntarily face discomfort, like requesting candid feedback on a project before it's polished, we dismantle the terror of judgment piece by piece. Here's how to apply this today. Identify one arena where criticism typically rattles you, maybe public speaking, creative work, or even personal style. Now design a low-stakes challenge to invite constructive discomfort. If office meetings make you anxious, volunteer to present first next time. If you're sensitive about your writing, share a draft with a trusted but brutally honest friend and ask, what 3 things would make this stronger? The key is choosing environments where the stakes feel manageable but still stretch you. Like a hiker acclimating to altitude with gradual climbs, you're training your emotional lungs to breathe easily under pressure. Consider how chefs use friends and family nights to test new dishes before a restaurant launch. The critiques, "This sauce is too salty," "The texture's off," aren't attacks, they're gifts preventing public missteps. That's the Stoic shift. Criticism stops being something you dread and becomes intelligence gathering. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle becomes the way," and nowhere is this truer than with voluntary discomfort. The awkwardness of seeking feedback transforms into the very path toward unshakable confidence. So this week, pick one safe space to request tough love. It might be asking a mentor to critique your resume, posting a creative project in a forum with clear guidelines for feedback, or even recording yourself speaking and analyzing the playback. The discomfort is temporary, but the resilience it builds, that's permanent armor against the arrows of everyday judgment. Because here's the secret Diogenes knew: when you stop running from mockery, you rob it of its power to wound. The barrel you once hid in becomes the stage where you stand unshaken. Imagine walking past a massive highway billboard flashing the exact words that kept you up last night. That coworker's snide remark about your presentation, your aunt's backhanded compliment about your career choice, or even your own inner critic's relentless script. How long would you actually stand there staring before walking away, realizing how absurdly small those words look under the open sky? That's the Stoic Billboard Test, a mental exercise that shrinks criticism down to its true size by exposing its fleeting nature. Marcus Aurelius hinted at this when he wrote, "Pay no attention to the barking of dogs. Just as we ignore the shouts of children playing, so too can we let idle words pass." He wasn't dismissing genuine feedback. He was putting petty critiques in their proper place, background noise, not front-page news. Take Taylor Swift's approach to online hate. When trolls flooded her social media with cruel comments, she didn't delete her accounts or fire off clapbacks. Instead, she reportedly saved the nastiest remarks as inspiration for hit songs, turning their barbs into art that earned Grammys. By mentally projecting those words onto stadium screens during concerts, she revealed their powerlessness. What once stung now fueled her creativity. The Stoics would have applauded this alchemy. It's not that the words didn't exist, it's that she refused to let them occupy prime real estate in her mind. Here's why this works neurologically. When we ruminate on criticism, our brains treat it like a looming threat, activating the same stress responses as physical danger. But visualizing those words on a billboard, or better yet, imagining strangers driving past them at 70 miles per hour without a second glance, triggers psychological distance. The insult stops feeling like a personal dagger and starts resembling graffiti on a passing train. Epictetus practiced this by asking his students, "Would you travel across town to hear a stranger's random shout?" Then why journey mentally to dwell on their words? Try this tonight. Recall a recent critique that felt heavy. Maybe your boss said you lacked initiative, or a friend joked about your cooking. Now picture it in neon letters on a 50-foot sign beside your local grocery store. Watch people push carts past it, too preoccupied with their shopping lists to even look up. Notice how the words don't change, but their weight does. That's the Billboard Test revealing the truth. Most criticism only has the power we assign it. Like weather vanes in a storm, we can acknowledge the wind without being uprooted by it. History's most resilient figures mastered this mental zoom out. When Gandhi faced British officials mocking his peaceful protests as the theatrics of a starving man, he didn't rebut them in editorials. He simply noted in his journal, "They speak as if their words are chiseled in stone, but even stone erodes." Centuries earlier, Marcus Aurelius mirrored this by writing, "The echo of applause fades faster than the clapping hands." Both understood that words, whether cruel or kind, are temporary vibrations in the air, not verdicts etched into our bones. So next time criticism lingers like a bad odor, give it the billboard treatment. Watch how quickly the neon fades when you stop feeding it your attention. Because here's the secret the Stoics knew: no billboard lasts forever, and neither does the sting of passing words. The road stretches far beyond it, and you've got miles left to travel. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that even his harshest critics were fellow citizens of the cosmos, not adversaries to defeat, but lost travelers sharing the same road. This radical perspective, called Sympathy by the Stoics, transforms criticism from personal attack to human misunderstanding. Picture a veteran teacher facing a classroom disruptor hurling insults. She could escalate the conflict, or she might pause to consider, what brokenness fuels this outburst? Is it really about me, or is this child crying out in the only language they know? That shift from taking offense to tracing the pain upstream is the alchemy of sympathy. Ancient Stoic hierarchs visualized this with his famous circles of concern, a series of concentric rings representing our expanding responsibility, from self to family to community to humanity. When someone criticizes you, they're not an outsider to your circle, they're a confused neighbor within it. Think of a nurse tending to a dementia patient's verbal abuse. She doesn't absorb the words as truth, but she doesn't dismiss the person either. She steadies them with compassion while protecting her own peace. That's sympathy in practice, recognizing cruelty as the language of the wounded. Consider how Abraham Lincoln appointed his fiercest political rivals to his cabinet. When aides protested, he explained, "We must disenthrall ourselves from the tyranny of resentment." Those critics weren't enemies, they were passionate citizens misguided by limited perspectives. Modern psychology confirms this approach. Studies show that when we humanize detractors by imagining their struggles, a stressed boss projecting insecurities, a jealous friend masking feelings of inadequacy, our physiological stress responses decrease. The criticism doesn't vanish, but its venom neutralizes. Here's how to apply this today. Next time harsh words land, ask hierarchals question: what unseen weights might this person be carrying? The coworker nitpicking your report might be drowning in their own perfectionism. The relative mocking your life choices could be grieving roads not taken. This isn't about excusing cruelty, it's about refusing to let their unresolved pain become your emotional burden. As Marcus wrote, when people injure you, ask what good or harm they thought would come of it. Once you understand, you'll feel sympathy rather than outrage. Try this reframe tonight. Recall a recent critique that stung. Now, write down 3 possible backstories for that person's behavior. Maybe they're overwhelmed, insecure, or repeating patterns learned in childhood. Suddenly, their words feel less like verdicts on your worth and more like artifacts of their inner world. That's the magic of sympathy. It doesn't demand you tolerate mistreatment, but it does free you from mistaking someone's storm for your climate. When we see critics as fellow travelers, flawed, fractured, but fundamentally connected, we disarm their words without diminishing their humanity. And in that space, resilience blooms. Epictetus taught his students a simple but revolutionary phrase that could soften the blow of any setback: fate permitting. This is the reserve clause, a Stoic practice of mentally appending these words to every plan, goal, or self-evaluation. Picture an archer drawing her bow with total focus, yet whispering under her breath, "If the wind allows." She controls her aim, her posture, her release, but never the flight of the arrow once it leaves her hand. That's the essence of the reserve clause, pouring your entire being into what's yours to command, while releasing death grip attachment to outcomes that aren't. Consider a job candidate who prepares meticulously for an interview, researching the company, rehearsing answers, selecting the perfect outfit. With the reserve clause, she doesn't just think, "I'll ace this," but "I'll give my best performance, fate permitting." When rejection comes, it doesn't vaporize her self-worth because she never conflated her effort with guaranteed results. Epictetus captured this perfectly. Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. The reserve clause isn't about doubting yourself. It's about distinguishing your labor from life's uncontrollable variables, the hiring manager's mood that day, an internal candidate you couldn't have known about, even something as random as a subway delay that made you arrive flustered. Modern psychology reveals why this works. When we fuse our identity too tightly with specific outcomes, "I'm a failure if I don't get promoted," we set ourselves up for existential crises. But when we treat results as information rather than indictments, I grew from this process, fate permitting. Resilience follows. Take the novelist who submits manuscripts with the mantra, "This is my best work to date, publishers willing." Rejections still sting, but they don't unravel her creative identity. Contrast this with the writer who thinks, "This book defines my talent," and collapses with each pass. Here's how to practice this today. Before your next high-stakes moment, a pitch, a performance review, a first date, script 2 versions of your post-event reflection. Version 1, "I nailed it, success is guaranteed." Version 2, "I brought my full preparation and authenticity. The rest is out of my hands. Feel the difference." The first sets you up for devastation if things falter. The second, it honors your agency while making space for life's unpredictability. The ancient Stoics saw this as the ultimate maturity, to strive passionately while bowing gracefully to forces beyond our sway. Like a sailor who maintains her ship impeccably but respects the sea's power, we're most empowered when we acknowledge the winds we cannot control. So tonight, as you journal about today's efforts, add those 2 liberating words, fate permitting. Watch how they transform ambition from a brittle demand into a durable practice. The effort was always yours, the outcome was never solely in your hands. Seneca once observed that time doesn't just heal wounds, it sifts truth from noise like an hourglass separating fine sand from pebbles. He called it the wisest counselor, this natural filtration system where petty criticisms crumble to dust, while valid insights settle into the foundation of who we become. The Stoic Hourglass Technique is about surrendering to this process, not passively waiting, but actively letting the weight of days reveal which words deserve your attention and which were merely gusts of wind. Picture a vineyard after a storm. Some branches snap, but the ones rooted deep remain, bearing fruit when the season turns. That's how time tests criticism, not by volume in the moment, but by endurance over the long arc. Take the scientific method itself. When a young researcher publishes a bold theory, peer reviews flood in, some constructive, others dismissive, a few outright hostile. But the critiques that linger aren't the ones laced with personal jabs or institutional bias. They're the ones pointing to replaceability, gaps, or flawed methodologies. Decades later, those substantive criticisms shape textbooks while the noise fades into academic obscurity. As Marcus Aurelius reflected, "The river of time carries all things away, what's trivial sinks, what's essential floats." This isn't mere optimism, it's observable truth. The feedback that still stings after seasons have passed, that's your signal to lean in. The insult that felt crushing in the moment but now draws a blank when you try to recall it. That was never yours to carry. Here's how to apply this today. Grab your journal and sketch an hourglass. At the top, list every critique that's recently weighed on you. The snide comment from a meeting, the lukewarm response to your creative work, the relative's unsolicited advice. Now fast forward mentally. Which of these will genuinely influence your growth a year from now? The co-workers nitpicking about your PowerPoint font. Unlikely, but the client's observation that your proposal lacked cost transparency, that might just refine your craft. Time acts as a merciless editor, and the Hourglass Technique lets you borrow its clarity early. Consider Darwin's decades-long delay in publishing On the Origin of Species. He didn't ignore his critics. He let their substantive objections simmer, using years of additional research to fortify his arguments until even skeptics couldn't dismiss the evidence. Contrast this with the playwright who rewrote his entire script because one audience member yawned on opening night. The difference: one trusted Time's filtration system, the other mistook a single grain of sand for the entire beach. Try this tonight. Recall a criticism that felt seismic when it landed, perhaps a performance review or a social media takedown. Now measure it against Marcus's river. Does it still hold shape, or has it dissolved like salt in water? The insults that evaporate weren't lessons, they were weather, the feedback that remains even when the sting fades. That's your compass, because the Stoics understood a liberating paradox. Time won't tell you what to think, but it will show you what's worth thinking about. Epictetus posed a challenge that still echoes through the centuries. Live as if your every action were being judged by those you admire most. This isn't about performance anxiety. It's about constructing what I call your inner tribunal, a handpicked council of historical mentors who hold you to your highest standards. Picture an ancient courtroom where Seneca sits as your integrity advisor, Cato as your moral compass, and Marcus Aurelius as your patience coach. These aren't imaginary friends, they're psychological benchmarks, internalized over years of study, ready to whisper guidance when criticism threatens to derail you. Take the young entrepreneur facing ethical shortcuts to quick profits. In his moment of temptation, he doesn't just consult his conscience, he imagines Ben Franklin at his shoulder, raising an eyebrow at the fine print. That silent presence shifts his decision more powerfully than any compliance seminar ever could. Or consider the novelist battling writer's block who asks herself, what would Maya Angelou cut from this draft? Suddenly, lazy metaphors jump out like stains on white linen. The brilliance of this technique lies in its flexibility. Your tribunal evolves as you do. Maybe today you need Lincoln's political wisdom, but tomorrow calls for Marie Curie's relentless focus. Here's the neuroscience behind why this works. When we mentally summon admired figures during decision-making, our brain activates the same neural networks used when seeking approval from real-life mentors. A study at Harvard found that participants who visualized historical role models before ethical tests demonstrated 30% more principled choices than those relying on abstract morals. The tribunal isn't magical thinking, it's cognitive scaffolding, borrowing the wisdom of ages to reinforce your modern-day resolve. Building your counsel starts with 3 questions: who embodies the virtues you aspire to, whose judgment would make you pause before cutting corners, whose quiet approval would mean more than 1,000 shallow compliments. Your tribunal might mix Stoic sages with personal heroes. Perhaps your grandmother's resilience sits beside Nelson Mandela's forgiveness. The key is specificity. Don't just select wise people. Choose individuals whose particular strengths counterbalance your weaknesses. A hot-tempered leader might seat the Dalai Lama next to Marcus Aurelius, while an anxious artist could benefit from Frida Kahlo's defiant creativity alongside Seneca's calm. Try this exercise tonight. Sketch your tribunal seating chart. Assign each member a role. Maybe Gandhi oversees your anger responses, while Marie Kondo judges your distractions. Then, when criticism stings or doubts arise, convene your council. A harsh review feels different when you first imagine Toni Morrison assessing your response. Public ridicule loses its bite when you sense Eleanor Roosevelt nodding at your composure. As Epictetus noted, we suffer most when we act without witnesses, then forget we're always witnessed by our own ideals. The ultimate power of this practice emerges in those unguarded moments, when you're alone with a temptation or facing an unseen challenge. That's when your tribunal becomes more than mental exercise. It's the living embodiment of your potential. Because the standards we maintain when no one's looking define us far more than our performative virtues. So ask yourself tonight, if the figures I admire most were observing my choices from the shadows, would they nod in approval or turn away in silence? Their imagined verdict might just reveal your truest North Star. After 26 ways to navigate criticism with Stoic wisdom, let's distill them into 3 timeless superpowers you now carry: perception, action, and will. Think of these as the Trinity of Resilience. Perception is your lens, the ability to strip criticism down to its bare facts, separating the what happened from the what it means. Action is your response, not impulsive retaliation, but the deliberate choice to refine or release feedback based on its merit. And will, that's your inner fire, the unshakable commitment to let your virtues, not others' validations, define your worth. Marcus Aurelius called this the inner citadel, that sacred space where your self-respect remains untouchable because it's built on something no critic can dismantle: your integrity. Consider the carpenter who measures twice and cuts once. Perception is her sharp eye spotting the grain's true line. Action is her steady hand guiding the saw. Will is her refusal to toss the wood because a bystander mutters it's the wrong shade. Together, these powers transform criticism from a threat into a tool, one that either improves your craft or proves irrelevant to your purpose. History's most enduring figures mastered this triad. When Lincoln's cabinet mocked his folly of emancipating enslaved people, his perception passed their political fears from moral truth. His action, the Emancipation Proclamation; his will, the resolve to sign it despite the tempest of scorn. Here's the ultimate truth Epictetus captured in one razor-sharp line: if someone tells you you're a donkey, smile and keep walking. Not because you're avoiding conflict, but because you know your true species. The Stoics didn't ignore criticism, they simply refused to let it rewrite their self-definition. Your value isn't a democracy where everyone gets a vote, it's a sovereign truth you carry within. So here's your closing challenge. In the next 24 hours, apply one of these 26 tips. Maybe it's the 3 columns exercise when feedback stings, or the phoenix response to reshape a setback into fuel. Then swing back to the comments and share what shifted. Did the hourglass reveal which critiques faded by noon? Did the sage's mirror show you strength you didn't know you had? This isn't just about handling criticism, it's about reclaiming the pen to your life story. The world will always have opinions, your superpower choosing which ones get to